welcome everybody. And as we are winding down or winding up with the counting of the Omer and preparing to welcome Shavuot, we are doing a program called Growing Through the Omer tonight, and it's about counting. And we're going to discuss a lot of different things about the significance of counting and being counted. And we're going to examine a little bit at the throughout the history of counting in Judaism. And we count people, we count days, and we count the Omer. We're counting the days of the Omer. So what does that really mean when we say we count the Omer? We really mean counting out loud all of those days, those 49 sequential days, and each one has a special blessing associated with it, or it's a part of one of the sfirot that is special. And we've also been counting, I think many of us, and I don't know, you'll have to tell me if you are part of this, many people have been counting the days of the hostages as we count the days of the Omer, because, when you're counting, you sort of remember at all times that the hostages have been held in Gaza. So we are going to begin with our first text, I think. And
we're going to begin actually by counting the Omer.
So we are going to count the Omer. Okay. So we always begin with this blessing. Blessed are you, Adonai, our God, sovereign of the universe, who has sanctified us with your commandments and commanded us to count the Omer. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu al sfirat haomer. And the fact that this blessing has in it asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu means it's rabbinic, and it's a commandment that we observe. And would someone, is there, because I can't now see the whole screen, but is there anyone that is a Hebrew reader other than Nina and myself who might like to read the days in Hebrew, the blessing for the days? And I don't know if anyone raised their hand, Nina, but if not,
I can read.
Thank
okay,
you,
please.
I think, let me see. היום 48 יום שהם 6 שבועות ו6 ימים לעומר.
Right. Today is 48 days, which is 6 weeks and 6 days of the Omer. And thank you so much, Yvonne, for doing that. And what's very interesting, even though it's not in our text, we have today is 48 days, which is 6 days and 6 weeks and 6 days of the Omer. What we normally, what is said, what the custom is to say that it's 6 weeks, let's say, and 6 days in the Omer. So we refer to this process that we've gone through and that we're going through for another night as being in the Omer. So, when someone says you're in something, I wonder what significance that has for anybody. I'm just curious. I'm curious myself when we say that we're X number of days in the Omer. What does it mean to you? Does it have any special significance? Anyone have a thought on this?
I can throw out a thought and then people can comment. The Omer is a time where we are not really relaxed, generally speaking. We're kind of anxious. We're kind of worried. Are we going to have our crops? And of course, it was the time of the Bar Kokhba rebellion, and you can't shave and you can't
cut your hair.
Right.
Hair.
And then there's Lag BaOmer, which is the one day where we relax and get married if we want to get married during this time. So when I think of being in the Omer, I think of being in a time of stress, a time of worry, but worry that probably my prayers will be answered and probably I should not be as worried as I am. And I feel like being in the Omer this year and having the hostages, it's almost like we're all super tense and hoping that we get through to Shavuot and that we bring the hostages home.
And, I also, I have a different take on it in general, is that when we're in the Omer, so much when you are in Israel or part of the land of is you're in the land. They don't say they're on the land. They say they're in the land. And so for me, knowing this is an agricultural, it was an agricultural counting of the grains, I always think of how our people are tied to the land of Israel. And I think for me, in addition to what you said, it really makes me, I'm tied to those hostages, and I don't even know them personally, but they are part of being in the land and having your heart be in the land. So I don't know any other thoughts that people might have about this phenomenon that we're experiencing. It's
Kristen
twofold.
has something to
Yeah.
say.
Go ahead, Kristen.
Yeah. When I think about it, I think kind of more of an interpretation of the time period in which we're doing this, because we start counting with second day of Pesach, and we end with Shavuot, the giving of the Torah. And during this time period, we've got the Jews, they've just left Egypt, and they're kind of wandering in the desert, which to them was kind of like, well, that was the beginning of them wandering in the wilderness. So when I think of being in the Omer, I think of being in the wilderness. And then when we get to Shavuot at the end of Omer, that's giving us the Torah to help us get out of that wilderness.
Beautiful. That was really, really beautiful. You just wrote a great midrash. We should have you published someplace. That was really, really nice. Really nice. Because it's a very tenuous and stressful time. We're between being liberated and not yet having received the Torah. We're b'midbar, we're in the desert. We're midbar, we're just like betwixt and between. So hi, Barbara, welcome. So anyone else that might have a thought on that, feel free to jump in, unmute, and share your wisdom. So Yvonne?
Yes, continuing with what was said now, yes, it makes me think that on the way in the desert before the laws existed, because we're talking about pre-Torah times. This being in the desert, being, without any direction and without any identity yet, because the Israelis, the Hebrew people, did not have an identity yet until they received the Torah. The Torah unified their behavior, their future laws, their everything, right? Even thousands of years after that, we're still living many of, not me totally, but so many mitzvot. Some people are still following the Torah. So it is, for me, a time of completely searching for identity. So taking it to the symbolic into our lives, how many times we are in times when we're searching, and at least we have that symbolic end in the Omer, in the counting of the Omer, that there is an arrival to Sinai. And we do get the light, and we do get resolution of whatever's going on in our lives. So that's how I see it.
That's beautiful. And I think it speaks very much to being in community, because we received the Torah in community, but more about that later. But that was just a little tease of thinking about the concept of community. And, we are going to take a look next at our next slide, if we can just pull it up. And Nina, this is your one to introduce. This is the hurricane slide. So I'm going to let you do this one.
I don't know how many people were following Eurovision, so I'll give a quick recap. This is Eden Golan. She's a 20-year-old young woman. She came from the Ukraine when she was like 10 to Israel. She's Israeli, and she was an Israeli contestant in Eurovision. They gave her an extremely hard time. She sang this song, Hurricane, which was first called October Rain and was about October 7th. But Europe didn't want any part of this. They made her change the words and change the title. They almost didn't want Israel to compete at all. during dress rehearsals, other contestants actually booed as she was practicing. And during the actual Eurovision concert, there were people who turned their backs on her as she sang. Nonetheless, her song was amazing. She came in second in the world vote, which says a lot, and fifth in the whole Eurovision competition, which is really, really awesome. She is a very brave and talented young woman, and we're going to share her song, Hurricane.
Nina, didn't she come on the float? She was on the float for the
She
Israel Day
did.
parade.
I got to shake her hand. I cannot tell you how excited I was when I got to shake her hand at the Salute to Israel parade. She was walking down the street grabbing people's hands, but I got to grab her hand.
And she was on she was on like one of the floats.
And then
with
she
a
was on
group
one of the
people.
floats, which of course
She was amazing to see. Just a beautiful woman, really.
She's, yeah, absolutely terrific. So I'm going to, first I'm going to change the sound so that you'll hear it better. I'm going to ask everybody to mute to make sure we hear this well. And then I'm going to put on Hurricane. So that is Hurricane by Enan Golan. And I think it made an important statement that the world, we were fortunate to show the world, and the world on the whole reacted positively to it. And since a lot of this war is a PR war, I feel like she was a very brave woman who did something very important. And we wanted to share that with you because we are counting. We're counting days and we're counting people. And this counts in a way that really is important.
We have this piece going into our next text, which is a prayer for the hostages. And then we're going to talk about counting in a lot of different ways. So if you could just, when you get a minute, put up the prayer for the hostages. So this is called Shomer Yisrael, Guardian of Israel. And if there is someone that can see it clearly and would like to read, please feel free to volunteer to be our reader.
I'll read.
Thank you, Francine.
Sure. We call out to you with fervent plea and prayer to bless and protect the civilian men, women, and children brutally kidnapped by Hamas and held captive in Gaza, along with the members of Israel's defense forces missing in action or held captive. May it be your will, speedily and soon, to bring them out from darkness and the shadow of death. May the Holy One of blessing break their bonds, deliver them from their distress, and release them swiftly back to the loving embrace of their dear ones. Do all that must be done so that relief, rescue, and long life may be the lot of every one of the soldiers and the civilians who have been taken hostage. Act on their behalf, Lord. Take up their cause without delay, so that you fulfill through them your verse from Isaiah. Those redeemed by the Lord will return. They will enter Zion with singing, and everlasting joy will crown their heads. Gladness and joy will overtake them, and sorrow and sighing will flee away. So it may be your will, and let us say, Amen.
And
Thank you, Francine. That was really read so beautifully. I really appreciated it and felt it when you were reading for us. Very moving. What did it feel like to read it?
Powerful, strong, like addressing a subject that needs to be opened up and addressed and fixed and helped.
Mm-hmm. Any other thoughts when people heard it? Any reaction to it that anyone might want to share. I felt like it was really speaking its piece, saying, do all that you need to do to make this happen, to redeem these hostages and set them free. So I felt that it was very determined, and they would stop at nothing to get the people back and bring them home. So we are in the 247th day of the hostages being held. And, there are 120 hostages that remain. 116 of them were taken on October 7th, and 4 of them were taken before. And 4 of them were freed, 4 were freed yesterday. So I'm sure people have seen on the news those very moving reuniting with their family, and Noah Argamani and the 2 young men that were, the 3 young men, I think, that were reunited with their families, and what that was like. And I've seen it on the news like 3 times, 4 times. Every time I see it, I cry anyway, because it's just so moving to see. And sorry, let me just, okay, sorry about that. My phone rings on my iPad, so I have to just disable it. But, I was thinking, I wondered if, as we just said, 247 days of the hostages, and how many are left and how many have been freed just recently. Have any of you been counting the days or doing anything to mark the days of the hostages since they've been taken? I'm curious what people, if any people are doing anything, because I don't have access to that many people.
Well, a lot of people, especially when I've been in meetings with other Jewish educators, they have like a piece of masking tape with a number on it, just counting the days. That's really the only counting of the days that I've been part of.
Anybody know of anyone doing anything, or?
I do get daily emails from the Consulate of Israel in Miami, and they say today's day.
Yeah, I get those.
I read it, you get it too. So that puts me in perspective. And then, of course, in the news of Israel, in YouTube, I watch several of the Israeli channels, and they always start by today is. So it's now that you mention it, it's the way a lot of the Israeli news start the news of the day. Today is, the number is important.
Oh, that's interesting. And I think very fitting and appropriate for Israel to do, because that's the top piece of important information to share.
To make sure everyone remembers, And
anyone else have any? People know anyone who, might be doing something to mark that time or count that time? I don't know. Barbara?
Well, on Friday nights, the clergy says this similar type of words, your prayer, your beautiful prayer. It's very similar, and they count on the Friday night service. And also so we started, it happened October, and no one could believe. So yes, this Hanukkah at home, we had an extra menorah empty and made it a point to add a prayer for people who were not home and not free to do. And this Passover, we had something similar. We had a place set empty at the table for someone to come who cannot now come.
Yeah, we did too. We had an extra seat at the table for Pesach. And, I know people who light a yahrzeit light every day or keep their light plugged in because they are remembering and counting, that way. And, other people that wear the yellow ribbon, the pin of the yellow ribbon, or the blue pin to show solidarity with Israel, the blue, it's like a bow, that they have down here in Florida that people are getting. So I think people are doing a lot of different things to remember. They have the dog tags with the, prayer. And for myself, I do also at services each week, I do the Achenu prayer for the release of the hostages and so on. So Yeah.
I'm in Buffalo Grove, Illinois, and in our community on Sundays, there is a walk where we are asking for them to be released with numbers on our, counting of the numbers. And in my community, I have adopted a specific hostage. Her name is Agam Berger, and on Friday nights, I pray in her merit.
Oh, that's very, very interesting. I mean, I think that really is meaningful, is so meaningful, everything that you're doing in your community, but particularly taking the name of one, because that's counting one by one, really, and that's very significant. Thank you for sharing that. Anybody else before we move on with any thoughts on this? Because I was going to
Yes,
ask how
Henry,
you
my
counted.
grandson said that they do it in school as well, that they talk about the hostages.
Oh, yeah,
Toward
that's
day
so
school.
important. That's so
Yeah.
important. That's so good that you do that.
Yeah.
So we have some information and some texts and some slides on counting to teach a little bit about counting in Judaism. It's very, very interesting, the whole concept of what we have. So a little bit of a background is that there's a prohibition against counting Jews. We're not supposed to count them. And there's a history of this that goes way back in our history. But it's not such that it's more of a tradition and a custom. There is not a law in the code of law. It's not a halachic law, but it is discussed by the halachic authorities. And there's a lot of different reasons why we don't count, but we have some texts here that we'd like to share. And I'm wondering if somebody would read the introductory text and then the text from Hosea. So we need 2 readers for this.
I'll read.
Okay.
Although the prohibition against counting Jews is not included in the Code of Jewish Law, it is discussed by the later halakhic authorities. What is the reason for this prohibition? The commentaries say that counting Jews directly can bring a judgment on the individuals who, if not deemed worthy, may be punished. As the Panim Yafot explains, when the Jews are counted as individuals, they become separated and are subject to individual scrutiny.
Thank you, Diana. And let's take another reader for the second text from Hosea.
If you can't get another reader, I'll be more than happy to read it.
Just go then. Go ahead. Because I can't
Okay.
see anyway.
Text
I can't see.
Hosea, chapter 2. To actually count Jews directly is forbidden, as the prophet says, and the number of children of Israel shall be as the sand of the sea, which shall neither be measured nor counted.
Thank you. So we'll put
You're
the
welcome.
gallery back up, because I thank you for doing this. I couldn't see anybody. I just saw your box, and I thank you for reading. And I think, it's very interesting. I started to get, as we put this workshop together, I started reading more and more about the whole concept of counting and how we count and what we count. And, we don't really count people, we count souls. And that's how our religion works with the counting of people. We count the number of neshamot, the number of souls that we have. And, and we're really prohibited, but I think it's interesting. And I wondered, what people think about just the fact that here's a culture that we are, a faith, a religion, a community, and we are really prohibited against counting individuals. We don't even have a word for person. We have a word for souls. And that in itself is very, I think it's very meaningful and very deep. And it also says that, counting us directly can bring a judgment on those who have not been deemed worthy, and will single them out for punishment. So I want to just pause there to have us reflect on that. Hang on now, my other line's ringing. I've got to shut that off. Sorry. So sorry. Line. Hi, I'm teaching. I'm going to put Daddy on, okay? Because I can't talk right now. Okay, hang on. I'll be right back. I gotta.
Well, while Deb is going, I'm going to kind of introduce what we're about to look at, the next slide. So we can't count individuals. Like I can't look at the screen and go 1, 2, 3, how many people there are, right? But yet there are times we need to count for very, very everyday occurrence. When we want to pray, we need a minyan. So how do we know if there are 10 people there? Israel has a census. And when the census is counted, there is some debate as to whether they should be counting. So I was just lining up the next slide, Deb.
Yeah, yeah.
Ready for you.
And that's so interesting about the fact I heard what you said about the census. That in itself is like mind-blowing, so we don't want to single out people for punishment, which is where I left you when my daughter called. And and so if we are a community and we're not counting one by one by one, then a particular one, whoever that may be, wouldn't stand out. But I'm wondering, it says, it can bring a judgment on the individuals who, if not deemed worthy, may be punished. And I wonder, does that also bring an attention to those who are more worthy, that they should be rewarded? That, because that's not in the text, is only this flip side of it. So, and also that when you're counted as an individual, you become separated and subject to individual scrutiny. But it also is a message there that, do we want to become separated from the community? And I think a lot of this holiday of Shavuot and everything are connected to being seen as part of the community. We received Torah at Sinai, not as Moses individually receiving it and saying, by the way, folks, I'm passing on these words from God. Here it is. But everyone was gathered and no one was higher than the next, and everyone received those words at the same time. They were all equal. They were a community. They were bound by those laws as a community to live in community and to function for the good of the community with the laws that we were given. So I don't know, did I pass anything, Nina, so far, or we'll go to the next piece?
Well, I think the next text we have is going to kind of be a comment on how we do count, and then we can talk about it.
Okay, because I want to give a little more background about the Nachmanides explanation and so on and so forth. So I can wait and parse it in, or I can do it all at once, whichever you think is easier for you with the slides. You don't care.
It is all easy for me.
Okay. All right.
So what would you prefer? How would you prefer to do it?
I'll teach a little more and then we'll run the slides. I think it's just easier on that way. So we know that, out of love for the people, for God's people, God counted us at certain junctures in history. Now, if you think about different Torah portions where the census was done and people were counted, they occurred at specific junctures in the Torah. They didn't just randomly occur, on the first day of Genesis and on the last day of the book of, Deuteronomy. So one of those occasions was the completion of the tabernacle. And in order to ensure that the Jews had sufficient numbers to merit God to dwell among them, remember, I will dwell among you, the quote, I will dwell amongst them. We needed enough people to do that. There needed to be a sufficient number in order to bring God's presence there. But also, we needed to count in order to know that we had enough soldiers in our battles against the Canaanites coming up as we were preparing to enter the land. So counting was not just done vicariously to see, how many people are on the Zoom screen today. It was done to know whether there was enough to merit God's dwelling among us and to merit that we could go into battle and be okay. We could hold our own against our enemies. And Nachmanides explains that rather than count the people directly, well, how did we count? Because the Torah tells us, bring a half shekel from each person and then count the coins. So again, we're not counting the people, we're counting the coins that they brought. I don't know if that is really like illuminating for anybody here, but for me, I think it's a wow for me, because it really teaches a lot about how we value human life and how we don't want to equate human life with certain things, that it is very, very special. So, if you have counted in a permissible way, which we're going to show you how you can do that and it'll be okay, then at the end of that, you could actually say the number of people. And, you know, one of them, you know, this comes from knowing the total numbers of the various tribes that were stated in the Torah. So it comes from something ancient. And we also, we know that, you know, we can't participate, a Jew cannot participate in counting, even if they're not the one counting, they cannot participate in the counting. So when the census, which Nina was saying before when I stepped out, when a census is conducted, there's controversy in Israel as to whether it is halachically acceptable to participate in the census at all, whether to like respond when they knock on your door or send you the paper, because, you know, the counting is only of written names, it's not of actual people. So that's an argument for allowing it to be done, because we're not really counting actual people, we're counting, you know, the records that we're putting down. And also the total number of census includes non-Jews, because non-Jews live in Israel. So it's okay to count because it includes, it's a mixed community that they're counting. And so a lot of the authorities, halachic authorities, say that you shouldn't participate in the census unless the census is done in a way that the number of people per family is simply not calculated. It's a group, you know, in this neighborhood, we have 450 souls living, but not in the Smith family. We've got Johnny and, you know, Sarah and, you know, Rebecca and so on. So they're very, very specific. And I think, I wonder what we think of that, because we're so numbers conscious in this country. We're counting everything. You know, I run a workshop and the first thing I'm asked is how many people attended, or I'm doing something for the Tikkun Leil for Shavuot here in Florida. And I have somebody who every day she calls me and she says, you have 33 people, you have 36 people. And I'm like, I don't care, whoever comes. She's like, no, it's really important that we know the numbers. So I wonder if it's a cultural thing as well. You know, here it's such a different culture. But what do you think of that, Robert?
Yeah,
what do you think?
I've also noticed many times airline people, when they're referring to the amount of people on the plane, they use souls instead. I'm sure you've heard that.
Yes.
We have 150 souls on board.
And if God forbid it goes down, they say we've lost X number of souls, God forbid. But yeah.
Right.
Any other thoughts on the phenomenon of counting, or anything that might be surprising to you, Bonnie?
I think we need to look also at those who are not being counted, because the census in Torah, women and children and those above or below a certain age are not included in the census. And so we have people that are, in a sense, don't count, aren't, they're there, and certainly we need the women and children.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, they're not part of the military structure, so their numbers are left out. And I mean, and that can be a metaphor for also those, when we take a census in a civil sense today, who are we not counting? Who are those who are unseen because they are not part of the ones that we count or that we count on? It can include people who are undocumented. And so that also says something about the society. As number conscious as we are, there are statistics that we either ignore or don't count at all.
That's so significant. Thank you so much for mentioning that. And I'm thinking like back to when kids are little and they're on a team and they count, they take, you know, they pick who they want on their team sometimes. Are you counted, or are you really not in the count? And what that must feel like to not, under certain circumstances, to not be counted. You know, when is it a positive thing to be among the counted, and when is it maybe a positive thing to not be among the counted, depending on what they're counting? You know, how many people have, you know, been arrested for drunk driving on the screen, you know, and do we want to be like proud to be in the count, or do we like, are we okay to not be in the count? You know, I think it depends on the situation and, you know, how we look at that. So other thoughts on counting? And, you know, how important is counting to you? Yvonne, please go ahead. Oh, wait, you're muted. You're muted.
I was very surprised. I didn't know about the prohibition of counting in Judaism. And to be a prohibition, I think the Torah is full of numbers and counting. So I'm a little bit confused about that. I mean, in the Torah, we hear about the generations, and this generation came up to the third and the fourth and the fifth, and then we have pages and pages. We have the number 7 and the multiples of 7 all the time. We have gematria in Kabbalah that takes numbers and the counting of the letters, the Omer, Shiva. So for me, it's a little bit confusing that we say there's a provision of counting when I think we are maybe the people that count more in our book of Torah.
Yeah.
So
very interesting. That's an interesting observation that you make from the other side of it.
yeah, from the other side.
Anybody else? Anything?
But Rabbi, you're saying counting people.
Yeah, people.
Okay.
Yeah, people. Yeah. Let's take a look at the next slide and let's talk a little more. So this would be, let's see, we've done Hosea. Yeah, the next one. Okay. So when you count for a minyan, you're up on the bima leading services. We use a Torah verse that contains 10 words instead of using, you know, pointing out there and going, I've got 1, 2, 3, 4. We use a Torah verse when we look at the people and we recite Hoshia et amecha uvarech et nachalatecha ureim v'nasem et ha'olam. You've got 10 words there. Save your people and bless your inheritance and tend them and elevate them forever. So of course, if you're leading the service, you need to know the verse, or that could be a problem. If you don't know it, then what are you going to do, you know, to do your counting? But it's interesting, save your people and bless your inheritance and tend them and elevate them forever. And that's how you count to know if you've got a minyan at the beginning of services, to see if you can do certain prayers that you can't do without a minyan. So I'm wondering, you know, what do you think about using this verse as a counting? Did people know this, that this is how it's done? Did anyone know this? No, no.
No, for me, it's a question. How do you have another story of how we arrive at needing 10 men or 10 people these days for a minyan? What do we know?
Well, there's a whole history. That's like a whole class in and of itself. But
Okay,
I
not
mean,
today.
but we, you know, but actually, I mean, and we need the 10, and 10 is constituted as a community. It's thought to be, you know, a community number for, you know, different reasons in text and in tradition. And, you know, my thought in terms of where we're living now, and this is just my individual thought, is, you know, you gather your community together, and for whatever reason, someone has come to say Kaddish, and you got 9 people there, or you got 8 people. So now you have the rabbi saying, but we've got 2 Torahs in the ark, and we've got, you know, oh, you know, if you're on Zoom, I would say to Francine, do you have someone else in your house with you? Maybe you've got a Jewish visitor, or you've got, you know, or to somebody, is your spouse in the next room, you know, and what we go through to try to make that minyan. And I'm thinking, what does that message give to the people on the screen, in this case, on the screen, let's say, or in the room, who there are 8 of them that schlep themselves there, you know, for whatever, and need to say Kaddish because maybe there's been a death. And I've never been in a place where anyone has said, sorry, we're not saying Kaddish for those who have passed today because we don't have a minyan. I have to tell you, I haven't for many, many years now ever been in that situation myself. As a rabbi, I don't do it. If there is a group constituted and someone needs to say Kaddish, Kaddish is said. If there's 9 or 10 or 8, I will never turn people away from saying Kaddish. That's just my personal, you know, that's my personal preference, and my community agrees, and we function that way.
Yeah.
But, you know, Yeah, go ahead,
Yeah.
Robert.
Actually, I was saying a yard site for one of my parents many years ago before the pandemic. And there were not enough, this is before Zoom, and there were not enough people. And they said, well, just come back in the morning, because we have a 7 o'clock minion.
Mhm.
And they had another minion at 5:30, but at 5:30 there weren't enough people. But now with Zoom, you count the people on Zoom also. But it's
Mhm.
interesting, you don't count live stream. You count Zoom, but not live stream.
Yeah, because they're watching and they're not
Right,
interactive. Yeah.
right.
That is interesting. So, this is the custom. It's been the practice forever. Certain prayers are not said if there's not a minion. Different parts of the Kedusha is not said in the Amidah, and certain other things are not, none of the Kadishes are done because there's not a minion and so on. And, the Torah, what about the Torah? Taking out the Torah and having a Torah service, not happening. So we have a lot of these rules that are very, very old. They go back in our tradition. And I'm wondering, in general, why do we count things? I mean, why would we count anyway? And what message does counting something give us in general, not just in Jewish, community? And what other ways can we count besides using the verses of this prayer? I was saying to Nina last week that I would count the tribes, the 12 tribes, and if I came up with 12 of them, of course I'd have to know them ahead of time in order to do that, I would know I had a minion plus. And if I couldn't get, through a certain number of them, I'd know I didn't have it. But I wonder, why is counting important in this world anyway? How crucial is it for us? And we're living here forever. Like, why would we be counting? Why is it so important? Ron, did you want to say something?
I think counting is universally important. I think it gives us a sense of control. If you know what you're dealing with, whether it's members of a team, numbers of people at a particular session or webinar that's being offered, number of people ready for combat, it gives a sense of organization. It gives a sense of reality in a way. And it's a way of kind of keeping track.
Mm-hmm.
Is very important, that things don't get away from us.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we use counting in that way. And then we use it as figures of speech, because if we say someone counts and that doesn't count, we have a sense of value in terms of counting. Certainly financially, counting is critical.
Yeah.
There's I believe, a midrash about God loving to count the Jewish people because they are like coins, like treasures that God has.
Isn't that lovely? I mean, and that's such a lovely story to think about and to place the value on the counting. And, we count up to something, 10 days left for something, or we count down, like when we're launching a space, ship or something, we count down, and we have some sort of structure and control as well in that way. So other reasons why people think we count before we go on to look at counting a little bit in a little bit of a different way. Anyone have any other thoughts on counting?
I just got bumped out, but now it reconnected. But I've also heard of when you're short on a minion, if you live in an area where there's a lot of Jewish people, they grab someone off the street.
Yeah. Or they open the
Yeah,
door,
like,
Yeah.
right.
And they say there has to be somebody walking around out on the street who's Jewish. Yeah. So, everyone does it in the way that they need to. And I wanted to share our last text, which is Lord Rabbi Jonathan Sacks. See this, and maybe you could read the quote on the side. You're muted, though. You got to unmute.
Okay, I can read it now. Text 5. Okay. The Jewish response to trauma is counterintuitive and extraordinary. You defeat fear by joy. You conquer terror by collective celebration.
Thank you. So my question is, how have you seen this present in the Jewish world since October 7th? Have we seen this lived, this quote, our response to trauma is counterintuitive because we are defeating fear by joy and conquering terror by collective celebration? Have we seen that? Do you feel we've seen that in the Jewish world since the war began? And contribute an answer. Ronnie?
Well, we've certainly seen it in terms of all of the Chagim. We didn't say we will ignore Yom HaAtzmaut, we will ignore Yom Yerushalayim. We didn't, because we simply can't put our hearts into it. We have not done that. You know, obviously we are going to observe Shavuot, and we do this in spite of, because if we stop, then our enemies have truly conquered us. They've truly won. So there's this need for continuing to recognize and celebrate in whatever way we can, even in the midst of very dark and certainly tragic times.
Yes, agreed. And other people, what are your thoughts?
I agree, and for me it was very emotional. It was yesterday, the release of the 4 hostages, and they showed different areas in Tel Aviv, Ramat Gan, and I lived there for 9 years, and I recognize the beach in Tel Aviv that we used to go, and then the side on the beach before the loudspeakers came.
Yeah.
For me, that was saying like, this only happens in Israel, this kind of collective emotion at something good happening, which of course everyone needed so much, but I think that transcended the Tel Aviv beach, the Hof there, Vayarkon Street, and it went like through the world, in the Jewish world, so I saw it like that. But it was incredible, people just minding their own business, and then having, I'm sure there were tourists there, and Israelis and young children and grandmothers, and maybe people from all over the world, and that for me touched me a lot. And it's
Yeah, I found that amazing. And I thought to myself, nowhere but in Israel would the lifeguard,
exactly.
announce through the loudspeaker that the hostages have been freed. And you see a universal, like, just mass of people, a sea of people, just such joy and, such connection at that moment. It was a beautiful, beautiful thing. It was so wonderful to be able to see that, and I thought to myself, we are all celebrating all over the world this, whether we're on that beach or not, we're all connected at this time. So that was a lovely example that you gave. Thank you so much for that. And I don't know if anyone else has any other thoughts about
Excuse me, Deb, where was this video?
It was on the news.
Well,
I didn't see it. On where?
All
It was
over the
on
news. It's if
all
you go
over-
to
on
Yeah, my only concern is that they weren't free; they were rescued. And years ago, there was an Israeli soldier that was freed for 1,000 Palestinians.
Shalit.
So that's
Shalit.
that's counting people. And now I think there were like 200 Palestinians and children that were killed in the process of rescuing the 4 Israelis.
Yeah,
So
they took
that's
247
that's
people
1 in
died.
50. That's 1 in 50. So I still have a problem with all the innocent people who are dying.
And I think what was particularly difficult, I'll just say from my perspective, seeing it on the news, is that they showed the joy and the reunification, and in the next frame, you saw the other piece of it. And that was very hard from from a publicity point of view and a supportive Israel point of view, it was not, it was not, I'm sure it was intentionally done, but it wasn't good.
I need to point out that these hostages were being held by families.
Right, that's right, in
They
a home,
were-
in a private
They
home.
were being held by these innocent people.
Yeah.
They were not being held somewhere away from civilians. There was no way to get these people out from where they were because they were 100% in a family's home. Just need to point that out. And that's something that our news does not make clear, but that's something that we should keep in our minds and our hearts. I'm not saying I don't feel sorry for people who die. Of course I do.
Mhm.
But I think it's important to keep that in mind as well.
So I just wanted to say as we close tonight that it would be wonderful if we could each take Rabbi Lord Jonathan Sacks' teaching into our own psyches and see how we can do that in our lives, at difficult times. And I also would like to wish everyone Chag Sameach, a sweet Shavuot with much cheesecake, blintzes, and anything else that you would like to enjoy, and that you receive Torah with joy at Sinai on this holiday. So thank you, everybody, for joining us tonight.
Thank you.
Thank
You're
you.
welcome.
Thank you.
Good
Happy
night,
Shavuot.
everyone.
Deb.
Yeah.
Good night,
Night,
everyone.
everybody.